good to see all of you. Session 8. So, Gretchen and Julie, thank you so much for being with us.
Sure.
What you don't know about this room is they like to have a lot of fun, right? So I thought we'd have some fun ourselves up here and start with a quick lightning round. Ready? Fast answers. Best book, podcast, TV show you recently watched? Julie.
Wow, I go first. Okay. So Gretchen and I are both obsessed with the same podcast, which I turned her on to. It's actually by a good friend of mine named Matt Katz. Has anybody heard this? Inconceivable Truth? Has anybody heard this? Anyway, it's a great podcast. It's by an NPR reporter. Cannot recommend it more. Best TV show that I recently watched. I'm a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan. I'm sorry, I'm addicted to Curb, which is now over, so I'm very sad about that. And I'm very, very, very late to the game, but I recently read All the Light You Cannot See, which I don't know if people here have read. I know there's a movie out that I haven't seen yet, but it was an incredible book, and I can't stop thinking about it. It really stayed with me for a long time.
Fantastic. Julie.
And just more about this podcast, The Inconceivable Truth. Matt Katz finds out that his father's not his father. And it's all because of 23andMe, but it gets even more bizarre. I couldn't stop listening to this, so I highly recommend it. I just read the book, The Last Thing He Told Me, which is also out. I forget who's streaming it, but Jennifer Garner's in it. Awesome book. And what was the last one?
TV show.
Oh, TV show. I just started watching The Good Wife. I know it's very, very old school, 2009, but I can't stop watching that.
Okay, great. I have one more question.
Yes.
What's your rock out song?
Well, that's easy for me to answer. All right now, baby, because that was Stanford's school song. We had a very rogue band, and they never did anything in alignment, and that was our school song by Free. Yeah.
There you go.
All right, you know how Mariano Rivera used to come out to Enter Sandman? If anybody here is a Yankee fan, every time he'd pitch, I've always had this fantasy that if I ever pitch for the Yankees, which clearly any day now is going to happen, I was going to come out to The Song Remains the Same, you know, the entrance by Led Zeppelin, the first intro. It's my rock out song.
Perfect. Yeah. So let's keep rocking here. Another question that I like to ask in rapid fire is who would play you in a movie? And what's interesting, Gretchen, is that you've been played by one of the most famous actresses in the world, Nicole Kidman. And I'd like to use that as our segue to talk a little bit, or a lot, about Lift Our Voices, which is an incredible organization that both of you have founded. And I would love to hear from your voices why you founded it and why it's so important.
Well, the interesting thing is that we never expected to be on this stage talking about any of this. It's not like you have powerful careers, mine in television, Julie in politics and television, and then one day aspire to become the poster child for sexual harassment in the workplace. I mean, that's not something that you aspire to put on the top of your resume, nor when I came forward to sue Roger Ailes at Fox News almost 8 years ago now, could I have ever imagined that there would be a movie made about the story called Bombshell. The interesting thing, and it's the point of what we do at Lift Our Voices, is that I had nothing to do with that movie, even though it was about my story, because I couldn't. Because I was silenced. I will forever be silenced because of the non-disclosure agreement I had to sign, which is what we did, was commonplace 8 years ago to resolve these kinds of matters, which is what we now fight against. I will never own my own truth, likely, which is crazy. I can't even tell you if the depiction of me in this movie was accurate. My husband can't tell you. My children can't tell you. That's how crazy and stringent these NDAs are. So we work to change the system inside the workplace to get rid of these silencing mechanisms, and we've had great success.
And just for the audience, just making sure you all understand that, she is under an NDA where she could not collaborate on the movie at all. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of understanding what the NDA term means and how Lift Our Voices is helping to make that in the workplace more clear for those employees who may not understand that term.
So when you get an NDA at work, sometimes it's known as a confidentiality provision, sometimes it's just something that's buried very deep in your contract. And I think for most of us, when we sign these contracts, first of all, we're very excited to go work where we're working, so we're not really thinking about the bad outcomes that can happen. But you typically, if you look at it at all, you think that it's really there to protect proprietary information, right? Proprietary trade secrets, the secret formula to Coca-Cola, which of course, if you know it, you shouldn't be able to take it across the street to Pepsi. But what you don't think about is the fact that it really has been expanded over the last 30 years to include everything. And by everything, it means sexual harassment, sexual assault, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, just general workplace toxicity, retaliation, all these things that are technically not legal. And what ends up happening is that you are in a very huge bind because first of all, let's say you're working at this job that you otherwise love, but your boss is doing something to you that's really awful. You can't tell anybody about it. Not your husband, not your wife, not your best friend, not your mom, not your dad, not your kids, not your priest, not your rabbi, not your therapist. Some of these are so broad you can't tell anybody. So think about the fact that you're living with a massive secret that's eating away at you every day because potentially something bad is happening to you every day. The second part of it that's really awful is that you can't share that with your colleagues. So that if I know that my boss is mistreating me, I can't, this may or may not have happened at Fox, I couldn't turn hypothetically to Gretchen and say, hey, my boss is sexually harassing me. Is he doing the same to you? Or warn her, or vice versa, that the same might happen to her if she goes and works there or interacts with him. So you're also unwillingly kind of leading people into this meat grinder where they're going to experience the same stuff that you're experiencing, but you may not know that they may not know that they're experiencing it. So on every single level, and this is for life, by the way, these NDAs are for life. So forget the fact that we had movies made about us. That's great that we can't talk about, but most people don't have movies made about them. Most people just live the secrecy for the rest of their lives, and it eats away at you psychologically until you have to leave the job, and then you can never tell anybody why. So for all those reasons, that's why you should really read your contract. Read everything you get, every email, everything you click on. Before you click on it, read it, because you never know what you're going to sign.
But it's not going to just jump out at you and say, the NDA is not, it's going to be camouflaged. It's not going to jump out and say, if something really bad happens to you at work, you'll never be able to own your own story or talk about it. No, it's going to be very lawyerized to just, you think you're signing something so that you don't give away proprietary information. And by the way, 1/3 of all Americans on their first day of work sign this kind of NDA, not knowing it, really. 1/3 of all Americans. And then there's the other evil, which we work against, which is called forced arbitration. If I asked you to raise your hand, does anyone know if they have a forced arbitration clause in their handbook, in their workplace contract? Hardly anybody, but you know what? You all do. 84% of all Americans right now have forced arbitration clauses in their workplace contracts unless we continue to stop that. And what that means is that when you go to complain, you think you're doing the right thing to HR, and if you have a forced arbitration clause, you will never get justice in the court system, which is your 7th Amendment right. You never will, because you're going to this secret little chamber called forced arbitration, where the company will pick the arbitrator for you. They'll tell you it's cheaper and fairer and quicker and secret, because it is, and that's a problem for you, because there's not the same amount of witnesses, depositions, there's no rule of law, there are no appeals, and only 2.5% of the time does the employee win. So guess what? Most people say, I'm not even going to do that. Why? Because they can't get a lawyer to represent them. So it is a catastrophic system that has continued this vicious cycle over the last 40 years in the explosion of silencing workers. In 1991, only 2% of all Americans were under forced arbitration clauses. Think about that. Now 84%. Back to what the gentleman was just talking about before, it changes over 30 years. Yeah. This has not been in favor of the American worker. So we have passed 2 federal laws to stop that. The Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act, March 3rd, 2022, with the president signing it. 8 months later, the Speak Out Act, eradicating pre-dispute NDAs for sexual misconduct at work. Companies can no longer force you into secrecy for sexual misconduct, but we're not done because we work for all protected classes and have introduced other legislation now.
And this audience is an audience of practitioners, of doers. 2022 is not an easy time to be passing laws, right? Especially about this topic. So can you help the practitioners, because these people are going to leave this room and go activate a lot of what you're talking about. How did you do it?
Very incrementally. I've worked in politics for 30 years, Gretchen, and also in TV. Gretchen was a journalist for 30 years. And so we both know that politicians don't do big things all at once. They really never do. And so we had to do this incrementally because there's a huge movement afoot to get rid of arbitration for everything, for your Verizon cell phone service, for your car rental, and also for workplace toxicity. We knew that was never going to pass. And we knew that there was even a lot of resistance, a tremendous amount of resistance in having it pass for every protected class. So we did what we could do, which was we started with sexual misconduct. There were 10 Republicans. We needed to overcome the filibuster. We were able to get, Gretchen is the Republican whisperer there. She's incredible in dealing with Republican members of the Senate and House. We were able to get it done that way. And then we said, we're not done. We're going to come back and take care of this for race, for gender, for age, which is what we're working on now. Thank you. And for other protected classes. And the reason for that is because, look, we could have gone home, right? Our issue was sexual misconduct. That's what we were exposed to. But we're really blessed. We know it. I mean, we have a platform, and we're not going to stop until every single person who's affected by these silencing mechanisms no longer is.
I'll just say a profound statement about passing two bipartisan pieces of legislation in the most hyper-political time of our generation is easier than changing culture. So think about that for a minute. Because we are so ingrained in the American system, unfortunately, to treat people who have the courage to come forward to say something is wrong as pariahs. And our first knee-jerk reaction is to get rid of them. And that falls into how we silence them. And so it's like immediately, they are a problem. We have to get rid of them. We'll protect the bad person at all costs. So we are also working to try to change culture at Lift Our Voices. And we believe that one of the tentacles of doing that is changing laws to force the change. And you hope that it actually has a dual effect, right? Now you can't force people into arbitration or to sign NDAs for sexual misconduct. But this person now who's doing the bad behavior, that power now goes to the person who now has a voice, right? So maybe this person doesn't do the bad behavior. So our whole purpose in this was to not only pass laws, but to change behavior, because we both have children. I'm sure many of you have children. We thought we had solved this in our generation. We hadn't. The only reason we thought that was because everything was going to secrecy. And when the Me Too movement started, after we helped to ignite it, the American public got mad because they started reading about these stories and they were like, wait a minute, we thought we had fixed this. What's going on? And we can tell you from this stage exactly what was going on. They were all going to secret chambers, and we were fooling the American public into thinking we had come so far. So you know what? This is our life work now, our passion. We will do this for every protected class, for our children and for your children.
And what's really amazing is it hasn't stopped there. I would love to explore what's happening as the next phase, which is also focusing on elder Americans. Yes, we're all aging in this room. I hate to admit it.
It's anyone over 40.
Yes. So will you share a bit more, because you've really expanded Lift Our Voices into the aging population, which is so important.
Which is, okay, so you're going to say, well, why did you go to that protected class next? And quite honestly, because it's all strategic in how are we going to, this tends to be more of a Democratic issue. How are we going to get Republicans to join in on this? Because it has to be bipartisan to pass. And so quite honestly, the next protected class that we could get our Republican co-sponsor to really champion was age discrimination. So we introduced the Protecting Older Americans Act a year ago. Happy to say that I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, where all bills go to live and die. It was voted on last month, and it passed 15-6. I had my daughter with me to show her how the sausage is made. And so now it's alive, so it has a chance to go before the full Senate. The House is a different story right now because it's chaotic. But we're hoping to get it passed in the Senate before year's end.
Amazing, amazing. So as we think about transitioning into what does the future look like, how do we continue to use your organization, Lift Our Voices, to make our workplaces less toxic, How do you, we started talking about the NDA. How are you thinking about that as an organization? And again, with a lot of practitioners and people who are doing the work, how do you connect them with the work that you're doing to make sure that our workplaces are less toxic?
So we always say that we're going to change the law for everybody, but it shouldn't take us changing the law for people to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And the first thing that any of you can do is to go back to your workplaces and say that they should get rid of NDAs and forced arbitration. It's not hard to do if enough people go and do it. Because the bottom line is there is no question, and there have been studies done, that the more people and women of color you have in any given company, the better the company does. But yet we're driving out the very people that we talk about wanting to protect, the millions and billions of dollars that we've spent on DEI programs over the last couple of years, right? But yet the same companies that are spending money on DEI programs are secretly shunting out the very people they claim they want to empower out the door, because these issues predominantly affect, I'll give you some statistics in forced arbitration, women more than men, Black women more than anybody else, and Black women making $13 or less an hour more than anybody else. So think about who you're pushing out, right? It's the home health care worker who's cleaning bedpans. She's almost 100% guaranteed to be a woman of color, and she's bound by forced arbitration. So if she gets harassed, assaulted, well, now she can't be bound anymore because of our law, but if she is racially discriminated against or discriminated against based on gender or age, she can't do anything about it. It's over for her. She just has to put up or shut up. And that's not the way it should be. And so all of you should go to your company. We're also working on an AI tool that we're raising funding for now that would allow us to have anybody submit their contract. And this tool would be able to review the contract very quickly to see if you're bound by forced arbitration or NDAs, because most people are not lawyers, they don't know. And then you could make a decision based on whether you want to work there or not. And ultimately, we're trying to empower the next generation of workers. We're trying to empower business schools and grad schools and law schools to go and say, we're not going to work at companies that do this. Imagine if Wharton and Harvard Law School went to Goldman Sachs or any company on Wall Street and said, you know what, we're just not going to work here unless you get rid of forced arbitration. Like that, it would be over, just
Exactly.
like that.
And we're also developing a corporate rating system which will evaluate companies on whether or not, the Russell 3000, on whether or not they use forced arbitration or NDAs to silence their workers, which will be an amazing tool for the millions of Americans who reach out to us saying, how do I know? How do I know where I can work with more transparency? So we will be able to provide this to employees. But more importantly, for those of you in the room who work at these companies, please encourage your executives to fill out our survey and participate, because that is how we can continue this movement forward, by being able to honor companies that are doing the right thing and setting a gold standard, and then others will want to follow. We will be giving corporations a grade. So if you want to get a better grade, then you should join our movement right now and get rid of these silencing mechanisms.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here on behalf of everyone in this room. I cannot wait to see who plays both of you in the next movie.
We still won't be able to talk about it.
Thank you.